speak now. Hopefully nobody does. But if there's nothing else before we get going, I'm going to pass over to Dr. Hala.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you for the invitation from Christian to join you today. It is my pleasure to be with you. I hoped to be face to face and visiting Scotland, as I love to be there all the time in Scotland. Can you hear me okay, everyone?
Yeah.
Great, fantastic. Thank you very much. So I'm aiming to have a presentation to one of the papers that and the research project that I'm currently working in, and open to your views and questions and recommendations and suggestions to improve the papers. We currently looking for a home for this paper, actually. So it is in, the paper that we write it and then we rewrite it again, because I do believe there is a lot is happening in the higher education sector in the country that that changes the direction of the paper from time to time till we actually find a home for the paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm sharing my screen. I hope it will be okay. Let me just see that. Okay, for some reason, I don't know why it's not. Yeah. Can you see my screen? Okay, Katie? Okay, fantastic. Good, yeah. Thank you very much. So the paper titles Dilemmas of Culture Clash in Academia, and it is as I said, is a work in progress. We started a few years ago with some colleagues, still in terms of finding a home for the paper, but it reflects my thoughts about change and culture, organizational culture in the academic world. So briefly, the paper exploring challenges and dilemmas faced by the sector and reflecting on managing organizational change within UK universities. The paper is trying to explore the debate around the culture, managing the culture of the culture of the sector, and how it can be controlled or not. This is a question we put in this paper. I do believe that we are trying to provide different point of view in this paper. So we did some interviews with academics and managers as part of developing these papers, especially focused on HR professionals point of view about the culture change in the sector and how to their views in managing the agenda of culture change in the paper. So we started with examining the attitudes of the managers, and in the development of the paper we also looked at some views from academics working in the sector. So I will present my ideas in around 30 minutes. I'm a little bit slow in presentation, sometimes pause a little bit. So please, bear with me. I will, return back to my points. And then I'm happy to have any questions. But again, if you wanted to have a question when I'm presenting, I'm more than happy to take this as well. So changes in higher education, do you agree with me? This is one of the things that we always experience in higher education institutions. We experience a change, whatever you are, an experienced member of staff or an early career researchers or a PGR or postgraduate research attaching to the sector. It reflects our engagements with the change. There is a lot of changes about how managers of universities in UK want the higher education to become a business-like organizations, or more business-like organizations. So there is a debate around universities became businesses. But there is a question about how and why we as universities became businesses. How are they going to achieve the target of business focused in universities? Are there any success in these trials of having the business model for universities? This impacts on different aspects of working in academia. It impacts on the culture, it impacts on how we do research. Do we still count what we're doing in research, and the using of metrics, for example, in doing research. So all the language that we use and the techniques, it reflects on this kind of the kind of change in the sector. So we're all aware of the dilemmas. We have increasing student numbers that sometimes we are aiming to, and sometimes we are not aiming to. We have growing competitions in the sector. I think that one of the core aspects of working in higher education, that universities normally not cooperate, but more compete together. We have new modes of funding, and we every year, one of the challenges that we face and the dilemmas, that there is a discussion around new funding structure for students and how this will affect actually our engagement as academics and managers in the sector. There is a lot of focus on performance management metrics. There is a lot of focusing on how we evaluate performance, how to quantify the performance of academics. And this is a big shift in the culture of the sector, because, and I will come to this point, we used to have more of trust in the professionalisms of the academic side in the higher education, and this vision has been now transformed to more focus on, I would say, the multifarious performance evaluation, the idea of audit frameworks, that we can see this in different aspects of our work. We have we have a lot of challenges about declining resources. We have challenges the sector faced within the COVID-19 and after, and it reflects on the leadership, and the style of leadership has been developed within this period and beyond. We also have many challenges in the sector in terms of well-being and mental health for students and staff and others. So I do believe that there is a lot of challenges that we are facing recently. So, as I said, these challenges reflects and may be caused to this view that the universities became more business-like organizations. We're talking a lot about market-orientated approach for managing universities. We're talking about managerialism and the hierarchical structuring of managing universities, and the focus on consumer focus, that especially about students as consumers, which is a term that trigger lots of debates in academic worlds. And this all have implications on us, on academics, in our role and on our identity. And I know that it reflects on other people as well, but I think that the focus of the paper is how it reflects on academic identity and culture. In terms of conceptualizations, the literature is focused on different terms that caused the changes in the sector. One of the, or this is some of the lists that the paper is focusing on. The idea of massifications, marketisation, managerialism, and the audit society, which is I will try to explain in a minute. Try to just look at my notes in another screen. So if we're talking about massification of the sector, there is a call in policy and practices to change the sector significantly, moving from presenting elite services to people, education, to have a mass higher education sector, and this reflect on the increasing number of students. And reflect on how we actually taking care of our students and supporting them to learn. One of the main features of massification, the idea of declining the resources and having the challenges of dealing with different students in different capabilities and the different skills, and need to trade them. Do we need that in a proper way? Do we have the time to do it? Also implications of the power and the, in some cases the literature cover the idea of them and us, managers and academics, in the literature review. Ronnie Tuddenbaum in his paper in 2014, he's talking about it. The universities has been used to be a collegial bodies where decision making is a collective process dominated by academic staff. And I think this has changed dramatically recently. I think so, because he argued that this has reflect on the organizational culture change in the sector and the rise of professional bureaucracies, which is a problematic issues faced the sector recently. Marketization is another feature. It seems the students as consumers, and one of the challenges and debates raised in the literature review about this view and how we should focus on shifting our focus to students as consumers, and how this reflect on the culture that has to investigate and provide account for students as consumers, and rights for students as consumers, and how this reflect on how we managed the culture of the sector and the sector in general. The marketization of the reinforced by the new funding trials in the sector. It's also, as I said, that it leads to more of the competition rather than the cooperation between universities, and increase the importance of professional practices like marketization and PR. And this actually reflects on the culture of the sector became more business-like, more like a culture of negotiation with students, rather than the traditional way of culture in the sector where we have the hubs of providing knowledge and sharing equal and inclusive opportunities to our students. And managerialism is one of the concepts that the literature review has been discussed in details. The idea of having the managers to be the solutions rather than the problems, and we teach that to our students. And managerial attempts to make changes without, sometimes enough consultations to the professional identity of academics and other stakeholders, and it reflects on the powerful elements to embedding culture change in the sector, and it reflects on the organizational structure, dynamics, and characteristics, and also the organizational culture in designing and delivering the mission for the sector. And this reflects on the declining, if you agree or not, but the literature review provided some example of declining the power of academic collegiality and the environment that we used to be surrounded as an outcome of the managerialist approach managing the sector recently. There is an intention at the literature suggested of the audit society in the sector, which is more about using the power to sustain and cost the impact of any initiatives we or the sector is running, engage more like metrics and quantitative audit rather than or more than the organizational, or focusing on the organizational values, and maybe less on the performance goals as we used to have. Increase the audits may, reflect on that we have we use the private sector financial models in different ways, and this also reflect on the way of governance of the sector, the accountability, the risk and trust, and all the mechanisms of business-like private organizations. And audit society is a concept that used recently in higher education institutions, especially universities, that to focus on events and outcomes and performance, and this not necessarily increasing the transparency, or maybe it leads to some questions about risk and failure, and it reflects in implications of power. As I said, the relationship between different stakeholders in the sector. The literature talking about it, for example, a concept like public management reform, which is introduced in higher education in early 1990s. It starts to talking about the idea of applying public management reform in higher education, and the idea of business-like organizations, which is applying the NBM in the sector, and how the reform will reflect on the management performance, the changes of academics, and also the idea of bureaucratic bureaucracy and procedures to management academics and management culture in the sector. So NBM, in some assumptions, it also reflects on organizational culture, because we praised by public service culture, and mixed it to shift with the private sector orientation. And in this case, the organizational culture has been considered as one of the main challenges of the reform of applying new public management to higher education institutions. There is some evidence in the literature review about the challenges of implementing NPM on higher education, and its impact on organizational culture, and the details about the relationship between the public sector reform and culture shift in the sector. And this was traditional discussion. I still refer to that, to be honest, because it represented to the roots of the challenge from moving to a more commercial context, I would say, in the sector. So in one of my papers, I explained in detail the shift from what I called the communicative rationality clusters, which is based on professionalism and academic freedom and collegiality. And this is what the traditional view of how higher education sector in UK used to be, to more about the instrumental rationality clusters, which is more focused on performance management, managerialism, and marketisation and audit society. And there is any evidence my PhD was about this shift in terms of management perspectives. So I'm still in this paper referring to the shift in different ways. All what I just explained in the literature review, we thought in this paper that it will lead to a culture clash and culture differences between what managers intended to do to apply in the sector, and how academics see the sector and the mission and vision of this sector. So there was much debate in the academic literature about culture management and if culture can be managed, if culture can be copied from one organization. Can we copy the private sector culture to the higher education if we still believe it is a public sector? We're talking about the dominant culture and which culture is dominant in higher education as a consequence of all the change that I just presented. We're talking about, do we have a past culture? How to look at the past culture and how we emerging behavior that is it related to the change in the sector, the culture change in the sector in different ways. Is there a potential clash of values between what academic identities and culture and what is a managerialism identity and culture? Is there a differences in the values, as I said, and this can lead to conflicts between academic identity and professional managerial identity? Question mark. And we can see that there is some attempts here that, for example, the UCU strike recently. This is a reflection of there is a conflict here that we need to find the negotiation around ground to set something serious on the table to discuss. I do believe it is not just about a temporary solutions. It's more about all this has been happened, maybe without great involvement from academics to the change for one reason or another. I'm also referring to, the conceptualization of higher education. So the academics and managers, they are ideologically beliefs and values may not overlap in respect to the rules and obligations of academics and the primary purposes of the institutions. This is what actually Winter in 2009 has been said in his paper. So there is a debate in the literature review about the conflicts and the culture happening in emerging in the sector. So we took all this fantastic and interesting debates in the literature review to build our study. We used the qualitative research framework to collect data from 9 case studies. Firstly, increased that to 17 case studies after we did semi-structured interviews with higher education directors in these institutions, assuming they are the people that managing culture, they setting the framework of managing cultures in the institutions. We also have documentary analysis to some of the published documents, and the range of the institutions, and this is not unupdated data, but we have in the 17 case study a mix of post-1992 and pre-1992 organizations. The research now moving to look at academics' point of view, but we started to look firstly at managers' point of view. We found that in the literature, there is a lack of focus on what managers think when we provide them with perspectives about the challenge and the culture management approach. So we're trying to provide empirical view from HRM perspectives, HRM managers' perspectives. And as I said, we moved this to complete the story, talking to academics, not presented here in this paper, but this is how the development in this presentation, but this is how the development of the paper. So we started with the directors of HR to look at their perceptions about a change and culture change in higher educations, and talking about the idea of accountability for process to accountability for outcomes from their point of view. I don't expect you read all this, but I'm happy to share the slides after, and there is a recording. But what we discovered from the data that more likely managers blames academics. They do believe that the academics, they are the problems. Change has to be done. There is no other options. There is no alternatives. It was clear from the data that change will provide better opportunities for the sector, but it is difficult because academics, they are the problem. And I think in one of the slides, it was very clear that one of the managers, they said, we do everything right and academics make it difficult. We do the paperwork like it is all about academic culture. And it's fantastic, interesting thoughts, because I am an academic and doing the interview, so it's also some of the reflection about positionality when you do the interviews and you hear that and you cannot say no, because you need to be to keep your positionality for collecting the data. But what managers expect, that managerialism is a fact, the higher education reform, moving to more commercial environment is what the sector is about. There is no U-turn. We used to have too much U-turn from the government, but it doesn't seem that there is a lot from higher education sector. So here what people is talking. They talking about a culture gap. They talking about if we want to do any change, especially in human resource management, in culture management, academics think that they should be in charge of it, and they do believe that they will not accept it. And one of the quotation that said that academics argue a lot, and this is one of the reflection that the difficulties of any change about the sector, it comes from the academic world, and it's very so much shows here that there is a problem, and this is why we moved the scope now to talk to academics. managers, they do believe that they still need culture change in higher education, and it's so important, and they think that you know, moving forward needs to have you know, development skills for management and academics to work together. So, you know, but it's very clear that there is a link missing between the culture of management, or the management culture and academic culture. So so the interviews opinions from the management perspective that there is a stress on marketization and a commercialization, and there is an embrace to managerialism as it is the instrument rationality cluster. There is no way to move away from that. They acknowledge the audit society pressures. They say less about massification, but it's also coming from, you know, from the literature review. They see the higher education becoming more business-like organizations, and they have their own power and their status increasing as a manager. So they do feel that of that. But they are frustrated by academic residual relationship power. So there is still a conflict, as we said. And they do believe that there is still a gap in culture and values, and, you know, but they don't know how to sort it. So they just blame academics in some of the interviews. So, I mean, the conclusion here that we need to complete the story and go and speak to some academics about a change in the sector, because it is very clear there is a culture clash. There is some change in higher education, but we don't know how much, in what directions it will take us. We do need to have a conceptual development, but also more about empirical data to provide some clarification to the culture clash in the sector. So I do believe the next step, as I said, is we have to find the or to collect the data from academics, trying to put the data together and try to find a way forward in the discussion from the data that we collected. And this is why we expect that despite the change and the initiatives that implemented in the sector to, you know, rather to change the culture, there is tensions and conflicts. There is conflicts of interest experienced by management point of view in dealing with academics. And there is a lot to do to look at the other part of the story. We're also hoping to reflect on the idea of control, competing organizational logics, relational power and culture preparation. And this will be some of the obstacles. We do believe that it will maybe aspire to transform culture, or maybe it will affect it in that way. And I will stop here and happy to take some question. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Hala. That was really, really interesting. I'm just going to open it up to any questions that people might have, whether it is in the chat or if they want to unmute and ask anything, please feel free. we have any questions or observations? Nandas, yeah. Yeah.
You just had mute, just to break the silence. Hala, I must say that was extremely interesting, and I can relate very well to many of the issues you raised. An observation or an answer or a question to you. You stated in one of your earlier slides that as far as HEIs are concerned, students are seen as customers. What happens when the students behave as customers? If they do, in your experience?
A lot. I mean, there is a lot in the literature about customer behavior, about customer relationship, about the contract to customers, about it. I mean, students, they have been put in this discussion without it maybe they agree to be customers. Did we ask a student, do students agree to be customers? We're also telling students as partners. Did they agree to be partners? Because there is, every relationship, it has different circumstances, regulations, and rules. I do believe that we need to ask students what they want to be. I do believe some managers from the study that they do prefer the idea of, you know, using this kind of business-like, as I said, culture, which is, you know, students as consumers, and we deal with this view. I mean, I have a student, she said to me, oh, I paid the fees. I don't want to have the fees in my discussion with me, because I know students will pay the fees, but I am in a position as an academic to evaluate their academic performance with an eye on they are paying the fees. There is a complexion in our role, how to actually deal with all this kind of complex conflicts, because I want to deal with the students as a student without seeing this kind of customer identity coming. But I don't know if I answered your question, Nandas. It is a very good point, but I don't have the answer. I don't think that this is this point, one of the point that shows the culture clash.
Hala, you actually not only answer, you went over and above by saying that we did not ask the students. It is my own restricted student area. I lead a module, a dissertation module on an MBA program, which has 196 students. They're international students, and they come from an area where, to quote one of my students just yesterday in a workshop we had, in my part of the world, sir, academics are God. And that student will never, because I raised exactly that question, are you customers or are you students? And the class representative stood up and said, where we come from, academics are God. Other students from other international backgrounds, other cultures, may behave or operate as potential customers, but yes, we have not asked them as such, and I do not know what my experience would be if I had any local students. Unfortunately, I don't have any local students in my classes, okay? I took too much of your time.
Thank you, Nandas. Thank you for breaking the silence as well. Professor Richard, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
And just sort of follow on from Nandas's point there, in a sense, you know, and linking up one of Hala's earlier points about the audit sort of culture. As you know, we're kind of driven by, for example, National Student Survey. And one of the things that always perturbs me slightly about that is that many decisions, management decisions, are made on the basis of these audits and that information, but do we ever teach students or guide them on how to make valued assessments of the quality of what, so it goes back to that question, you know, do we ask what students want? And do they know what they want, would be my retort to that as well. You know, what is it, you know, how does a student know what actually makes a good course? And yet, as we know, in terms of change management and decisions, in terms of strategy, there's an awful lot that happens that's based on outcome from different audits and surveys and so on. And I'm, you know, so it's trying to, I suppose, looking at the quality of the information that's used to make decisions.
Thank you. Yeah, I thank you, Richard. Very interesting thoughts. I think I do agree with you. It is about the making a decision based on what, and this is why you know, one of the things that, you know, I'm openly explicit about it, the idea of metrics that we used in taking decisions to any it is important tool, but it shouldn't be the only tool that universities and use to evaluate work. And you know, if there is a culture related to metrics, and I don't know how we're moving toward that. Have we been trained our student to accept the metrics? How been trained ourselves to accept that? I think there is a lot we can do to say that we need more than one tool to evaluate performance, because I am a qualitative researcher and I do believe in words. I do believe in narratives. I do believe that if I have 73 students, they said they are happy, I want to say what, to know why they are happy. And if they are not happy, I want to know why they are not happy. So these are the things that I am behind. So it is about the quality of the assessment and the, you know, having a meaningful assessment as well, and evaluation. So thank you.
I just want to jump in here with some stuff that's happening in the chat. So Karen, I'll come back to you, but Kay's post is kind of following on from both Nandas's point and Richard's point. So Kay, you know, jump in if you want to, if I'm picking you up wrong. But Kay's first point is about you know, we didn't ask students if they want to be customers, but by the same token, nobody's asked the academics whether they want to be the customer service providers. And then Kay's follow-on point is about universities being run much more like a business than many businesses are, because the government is so obsessed with metrics of performance and deciding for us what performance means without actually involving the academics in the discussion. So there's kind of two points there. The first one, Kay.
Hi. Thanks for reading that out, Katie. Sorry, I was just like listening and thinking, this is the kind of stuff I've been thinking about, you know. Thanks a lot, Hala, for coming and talking to us. You know, this whole thing about marketization in higher education became an interest of mine when I was doing my PG certificate in higher education. So yeah, I wrote a paper kind of specifically looking at things like that. I mean, it was just what I had to do to get the certificate. But yeah, these are like some of the things that I grapple with and, you know, find really interesting, because honestly, you can hear from my accent, I'm not from the United Kingdom. And it's been a bit of a struggle for me to kind of learn to exist in this academic environment. And, you know, when I tell people I'm an academic, I always do that with like a tone of, like an ominous tone. I'm an academic, because I feel like what I do as a lecturer at a university in the United Kingdom has so little, if anything at all, with academics, what I think being an academic means. And feeling so constrained by the metrics, by, you know, performance ratings, whatever, I don't even know what you want to call it, the NSS, you know, and the thing is I'm coming in here, I'll just say it like this, I'm coming in here as an outsider, and I know that all of these things are here now, and I kind of have this assumption that, well, somebody must have put a lot of work into this to create this and must think this is right. And I'm sitting here looking at the questions that we pose to students on the NSS, and I think, does anybody really know what the validity is of these questions? I don't even find them to be content valid. Has anybody checked to see whether they're robust? Are they actually, do they have any predictive validity? You know, why are we asking students if they felt intellectually stimulated? Do we even know whether they want to be intellectually stimulated? And, I have my views that students these days, I think they have maybe a different idea of what it means to get a degree, to get a qualification. They think learning should be entertainment. Yeah. And I often have said this before, I feel like I need to be a pop star or a rock star or a stand-up comedian, because every single time we get comments back from students, it's just the slides are not engaging. Okay, great. And you get students, when you do get the qualitative answers from the NSS, you get, oh, this lecturer was great, loved it. Then you get the absolute other end of the spectrum. This class was crap, the lecturer was crap. And that's what you get. What are you supposed to do with that? So I agree totally with you to say that I much rather have a little focus group with my students on the last day and ask them, what did you think? Now that might, I might be in a position of power where they would be afraid to tell me anything negative. I hope not. I hope that I'd created a safe enough environment that would be okay. And I tell them, please, it's okay. I'm not, I don't know. I just think there's so much more we could do to be better at what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's
sorry.
No, I think that you sharing what we all sharing in closed rooms, but we don't want to be other people to hear us. I think we should write about it. We should to speak about it. And I do agree. And did another project with early career researchers about REF, and their emotions with something related to REF. Early career researchers, they're going through, and it is also another metrics. It is another pressure on them. And had a comparison between this well-established researchers and early career researchers and their views when,